Samuel chapter 8. Where we closed up on Sunday is with Samuel and the children of Israel. And as they met the Philistines in battle, and the Lord gave Israel victory. And he set up there a stone. You remember, what do you call that stone? Ebenezer. What is that about? What does that mean? A stone of help is what that was. And it was to be a reminder, for the children of Israel, whenever they would see that, how God helped them at Mizpah and in their battle against the Philistines. That's what that was all about. And so the latter part of chapter 7 tells us about how there was peace in the land. And that was in verse 16. Yeah, so the Philistines were subdued and did not invade the Israelite territory again. Well, that's for a period of time that it happens that way. And in verse 15 it says, Samuel continued as judge over Israel all the days of his life. And so he was a judge for a long time. He was the leader of the children of Israel for a long time. And what we know about him already, and we'll see this going forward, is that he was a righteous man. He was, for a long time, as we said, he judged, and he did so faithfully. But now we see as we get into chapter 8, as he got old, now his sons come into the picture. And you remember, just like Eli, his sons are not what they need to be. And, you kind of wonder, what's up with that? Samuel, everything that we see about Samuel is good things that we see. We see his righteousness. We see how he inquires of God. We see how there's a relationship with God. And yet with his sons, it's not that way. In chapter 8, those first few verses, he appoints his sons as judges over Israel. But what did Israel think about that? What was their thoughts about that? But they weren't happy with it. Why not? They weren't like Samuel. They were not like Samuel. They were willing often to listen to Samuel. But the sons, there was no respect there. Because, they were not the righteous men. Their reputation was that of turning to dishonest gain and taking bribes. It doesn't take very long to get a reputation, when that's the lifestyle. So in chapter 8, verse 4 and verses following, the people start to demand a king. Imagine this now. Because who is their king? God is their king. God is their king. And so just to think about this for a moment, that they're saying to Samuel, you need to find us a king. We need to appoint a king for us so we can be like other nations. Like, really? God has been trying to keep them all this time to not be like other nations. And now their plea to Samuel is, we want a king so we can be like other nations. Verse 6 says, 1 Samuel 8, verse 6. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel, and so he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not that they have that is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from this day, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt unto this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you also. Wow. So Samuel is going like, I can't believe this. God is saying, yeah, I pretty well expected this. And Samuel, they're not rejecting you, but it is me that they have rejected. And again, our disappointment, really, with the children of Israel in that way. Samuel goes on in the rest of the chapter to explain, all right, so you know how this is going to work for you? If you have a king like other nations, you know how that's going to work for you? He says, well, the king is going to require everything from you. He's going to take money from you. He's going to take your sons. He's going to take your daughters from you. And really, this was no new news, because back in Deuteronomy chapter 17, this is exactly what Moses said way back then. You remember when we went through that? And so Moses already gave this warning. If there comes a day when you want a king, let me tell you how that's going to work out. And so now Samuel is basically saying the same thing, but in verse 19, In verse 19, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and to fight our battles. And when Samuel heard all the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, listen to them, give them a king. Then Samuel said to the men of Israel, everyone go back to your town. And now there's going to be a king coming into the picture. But not the next chapter. In fact, not right now. Well, it is the next chapter, but we're not going to the next chapter. Okay? So we've taken this trip over into 1 Samuel, the first eight chapters, as we continued our study through the Judges. But now we're kind of transitioning into a little bit different time here pretty soon. But tonight we're going to study a couple of chapters going back to Judges with some stories there that are just kind of bizarre and troubling at the least. We'll get there in just a second. Lance, what do you have?
Just a small comment about chapter right here. I think one reason that Eli and Samuel's sons gained their reputation so quickly is because of such a sharp contrast to Eli and Samuel themselves.
That's a good point. You know, it was like, sometimes you say the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree when the children act just like the father. But in this case, it was not that way. They did not act like their father. It was a tremendous contrast. And so, yeah, maybe that made it stand out even more so, because of that. Very soon here, we're going to get into the beginning of the United Kingdom. In fact, when we go chapter 9 and going forward from there, we're entering into that period of time of the United Kingdom. But like we said, we're going to take a little side trip. We're going backwards, really, back into Judges and looking at a couple of chapters there in Judges. And then we're going to quick study of the book of Ruth. So these stories that we're backing up to, I'm not sure even that they fall during the period of time during the Judges. They might. They might have been during that time. But they're not really connected with the stories of the Judges. And so it's kind of hard to determine exactly where they are, but you know what? These stories have some value to them. God has included them here because there's some things that he wants us to see or to learn from these. And so we're going back down to Judges chapter 17. So go back a few pages with me at Judges chapter 17. Boy, this is a peculiar story, but not as troublesome in some ways as the next one that comes after this. And sometimes, again, I wonder, why is this even in there? Because it's part of the history of the children of Israel. That's why it's in there. And as troubling as the stories may be, there are lessons that come out of that. There are applications. And in fact, as we study through these stories, that sometimes people ask some questions, and I just say, I don't know. I don't know why that happened. I don't know why he did that. I don't know why. But in the big picture, I still see applications. I still walk away with something from that. And I think that's why it's there. Because there is something for us to learn that way. So we're in chapter 17, looking at this story. We're going to read a few verses. Chapter 17, verse 1. Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it. Then his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son. Already I'm confused. I'm thinking, I'm not the mother, but if I was the father and my son told me that, I'm just not sure my response would be, may God bless you. That just strikes me as odd, okay? Well, yeah, he's being honest. He said, yeah, I stole from you. So, okay, maybe this confession is good. But I'm not catching the remorse part. I think that's what's troubling to me with this, okay? All right, I digressed. Let's read on verse 3. When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a cast idol, and I will give it back to you. Okay, now it's becoming more bizarre. She's happy to get this money back, so much so she's, I'm going to consecrate it to the Lord. And we're going to make a silver carved image, to commemorate this, an idol. Okay, now, Dad, more confusing to me. Oh, but there's more. Verse 4. So he returned the silver to his mother, and she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who made them into the image and the idol. And they were put in Micah's house. Now this man, Micah, had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some idols, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. I'm understanding that part because I'm seeing that. Everyone does whatever they want to do, even when it comes with what they may call a relationship with God or whatever God it is that they are following. They're just doing whatever it is they want to do. So this is the setup to the story right here. It is just odd to me. And so, think about this. There is some acknowledgement here of Jehovah God, but seemingly they don't understand what it is to worship Him. Because they're going to worship God by making a graven image of Him or for Him. I'm not sure about that. What do you think God's response to that would be?
He's already commanded them not to do that specifically.
The second of the 10 Commandments says something about not making a graven image. So even if you make a graven image and you consecrate that or dedicate that to God, that's not what He's said. That's not what He has asked for. In fact, He has spoken against that. And it would also seem to me that they are incredibly familiar with household gods because they already have those, and now they're making more. And then the idea of Micah appointing one of his sons to be a priest. Like, where does that come from? So this idolatry, we've seen this all along. We've seen this. Think back. When Israel came out of Egypt by the power of Jehovah God, we find not very far into that story that they're carrying idols, false gods. While Jehovah God is leading them out of bondage, they're still carrying their idols. God has had a lot to say about foreign gods and idols and about how that should not be a part of their life. We've seen how many times interjected into the story, times when Israel was familiar with idols and with these gods. And that there would come a time during the period of the judges, a time when they would hit that low spot and they would repent and turn to God and they would get rid of their idols. Like, why did they have those? And so still what we're seeing is they are very familiar with Micah and his family and his mother are very familiar with household gods. I don't know. I just find that hard to understand. There's probably some other points of application that we can make with that. Perhaps that'll come along here. Because out of this story, somewhere we have to make some application. It's here for a reason. It's here for a purpose. Okay, so, perhaps more bizarre. Let's read a little bit farther here. Verse 7. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living within the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On the way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver every year, your clothes and your food." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man was to him like one of his sons. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest." Okay, so explain some of this to me about what's going on right here. And what part of this is something that God is saying, this is a good thing to do? Just what are your thoughts? What would you say, David?
I get the sense that Micah felt a little bit uncomfortable with what he had done earlier. Verse 5, he ordained one of his sons who became his priest.
Okay.
First of all, that's kind of bizarre. His priest, not a priest or the priest.
Yeah.
His priest.
Yeah.
He was not of the tribe of Levite.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, then, what we're talking about here,
Yeah. So now this Levite comes along.
I got an opportunity to make this better.
Right. Okay.
Did an actual Levite.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, okay, let's take this a step up now.
And so, if I wasn't quite on the right track before, surely the Lord will be pleased with what I've done.
Yeah. Because now I've got this Levite, and I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to pay him well, give him a place to stay, and I'll buy his clothes and food, And so for this Levite who's going along looking for a place to go, I can't take it like he's looking for a job. I'm thinking like he might have found a pretty good gig right here. He's got a place to stay. He's getting paid. He's been promoted, from being a wanderer to now being a priest. Okay. So, what about this? Where does this come from?
I think that's a perfect example of what's reiterated over and over. People did what was right in their own eyes.
We just read this.
That seemed like a good thing to do, so let's do it.
Okay.
He can't be a priest. He has to be a limited term.
And so, yeah, it's like, remember, all priests are Levites, but all Levites are not priests. Remember? Okay, so nothing said about him being of the tribe of Aaron, or of the clan of Aaron. I'm kind of wondering here, thinking about who's got her hand up. Jake.
I did. Maybe he's kind of squashed it there with that comment. I was going to say he's a Levite, so there's some maybe indication that he should know what a priest is, what the importance of being a priest. And so you have two sides of the coin there. And I think back to answer your question of how could God view this as good? Clearly there's a desire to please God still, but the information that they have, the knowledge that they have of how to please God is so far on from what it needs to be, that they're focusing very much on earthly things like idols and thought and those things. And that's a common thing we still have today. Humans look so much to earthly things. We can't take our view and our desire off those things. And maybe God compromising and allowing judges is the way to say, okay, I get it, you guys have your problems with earthly things you can't protect yourselves from. Let me give you an earthly judge that maybe intercedes in between.
So let's take this to a point of, is there some applications that we can make from this? Sandy?
To me, it's like, I feel like he's trying to win God's favor. So like, not a whole obedience to God. He just wants to do, come and make his checkbox,
Yeah.
I've done this, but I'm not going to give you my whole obedience.
He's even willing for it to cost him something, monetarily, cost him something, to try to please God. Tim?
It's not uncommon then to make God something we can relate to with our senses, with our carnal senses. I want to be able to see, I want to be able to touch Him, and make the same mistake when He made the golden calf.
Mhm.
This is the God that brought us out of Egypt. But they want something they can put their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be very careful that we're not trying to approach God in our carnality. In our private worship, in our public worship, we cannot be carnal people. It is idolatry.
Can we do that even without there being idols, like an idol as in a little statue? Can we do things in such a way in our work or service to God that we think will just automatically be pleasing to God? Because it's something we can see as tangible. Do you think we can fall into that?
Change our worship to do things that are pleasing to God.
Yeah, okay, right. Joe and then Brad.
Yeah, the other side of it is that the Levite should have known better. It's like Apollos, who was preaching pretty good, but not quite right. So he was pulled aside and corrected. Whereas the Levite just, hey, I got a gig now, and I'm just going to let it ride.
And it's been said a couple of times, I think that this is so right. A Levite, he should have understood something about the priestly roles and how that happens and where that comes from. So it's like, yeah, there's something else behind this, Brad.
Yeah, and I think that was what I was going to say. I didn't hear Chase completely, but just to come at it from another angle, there is no leadership in Israel.
Right.
So left up to their own devices, like, I think this is good. So what else is there to do? Now, this guy should have known better, and I'm not taking up for Micah, but there is no leadership apparently in Israel at this point.
Right.
So, what does God want? And when that can be an application for us today, we need leadership within the Lord's body, because we need to listen to the leadership, and they need to guide us and teach our children. I mean, there's a ton of applications you can make.
I think so too. I think the applications start to flow here. That, Micah should have known better. Well, why doesn't he? Well, there's been no leadership. Maybe there's been no teaching. That doesn't absolve him of responsibility. Now, I'm not saying that, but still, we understand how these things happen. If there's not been the teaching going on that needs to be.
I think it's probably also indicative of the culture around them. So they came in and took over. If we let our culture influence what we know, then there were other places that likely had gospel gods.
Exactly. Okay, and how many times have we seen this and said this already? When God said, when you go in there, you're going to destroy everybody take away all their gods, and they didn't do that. And were they affected by that? Yes, we've seen that over and over again.
I think Romans 2 a lot, the idea that, God has made himself known to man, right?
Yes.
And all the way back to after Noah, Genesis 11, when everyone was scattered, they all knew who God was at that time. So
Right.
every culture, every nation, every family at some point had God in their history. So I do think part of this is people have a natural tendency towards some spiritual thing, but then they don't go to the source, the correct
Right.
spiritual thing. They try to meet a need. Later in the next chapter, he says, you stole my gods. So it's not even like he's thinking of one God that he's honoring. He's completely wrong, and yet they keep sort of making a little tiny gesture.
As it gets farther into the story, and his gods are taken away, he goes chasing them down because those are his gods. Well, yeah, they're his. He created them, he made them, he set up his priesthood. This was his religion. Can that happen to us? I'm thinking it can. It may not look like this picture, but I'm thinking it can. Alan?
If you connect the first part of the chapter with the last part of the chapter, in that he's obviously a selfish guy. He admitted to stealing from his mom. Okay? And then at the very last part of the chapter, he says, now I know that the Lord will be good to me. Okay? Since I have a Levite as a priest. So it appears to me that we're dealing with a selfish guy here.
Mm-hmm.
And he is looking for benefits for himself. And so, to me, if you are what you need to be spiritually, it's about God. It's not about me. It's about God.
Yeah.
And it's about obedience. And so I'm not going to be stealing from my mom. And I'm not going to be trying to make deals with God, saying, okay, if I get this guy this job, now then you're into the deal, God, is that you have to be good to me.
Right. Yeah. This idea of selfishness, I think, is another standout point that comes with this too. Wayne, do you have a point or something?
Yeah, I have a thought, and kind of difficult to express it, but I think what I see happening to the Israelites in this time is that they have become separated from, I'm going to say, the focus on God, which was there through the tabernacle.
Mm-hmm.
It should have still been there. The teaching that you mentioned a moment ago should have been taking place, but it should have been from the fathers to the children and also so on and so forth down the line. It's obvious in this case that Micah didn't have that teaching. because he had adopted his own system, if you will, of worship or religion, maybe confusing it with some of the things that were going on in that land in those days. But we today, if you really think about it, who is it that has the responsibility today to pass the word down to others? It is those of us who have been saved. We are, if you will, the fruit that comes from the salvation that Jesus offers us, and that fruit is to bear fruit.
That's right.
Plant and bear fruit. If that was not happening, then it's obvious because Micah chose to do whatever he wanted.
And you think about when Jesus would be talking about some of those kinds of things, or being a light on the hill, you know, things like that. Don't you suppose that he's thinking about even some of these lessons and these stories of generations past where that wasn't happening, where there should have been the fathers, you know, the fathers of the nation that was teaching, and the fathers in the home, you know, that are teaching, you know, and so we have an opportunity, you know, to be able to talk about what God says, you know, to other people. We don't need making our own gods. We have a God. Let's be subject to him. Okay, let's move on here just a little bit. So, you know, thinking about just the reality of this situation here a little bit. You know, Micah is doing things that were not according to the law. You know, hiring the Levite, that didn't help the situation. And it doesn't matter how religious this seems to him or to anyone else around him. You know, it was out God's authority. That's never a good place to be. And so it's no matter how you try to cover it over, what Micah is doing is he's worshiping his gods, and it's idolatrous. There's no way that Jehovah God can be satisfied or pleased with any of this. Though he had a sense of security, you know, as I'm saying, you know, God will surely look at me good now, will take care of me now. So, looking here, just thinking a little bit farther as this text goes on and into chapter 18. I want to cover chapter 18 tonight. But when we look at chapter 18, really, I'm wondering if it's not just an expanded storyline of what happens back in Joshua chapter 19. We're not going to go back there, but we're just thinking back on that. You remember when Dan, like all of the other tribes, received a portion of land when the allotment was given to them. You know, we know from Numbers chapter 26 that when the second census was taken, the soldiers from Dan numbered 64,000. Right? Just having that in our mind. It was not the biggest tribe, for sure. But 64,000 soldiers is what they had. And so in the story that we're coming into here, there is a band of 600 soldiers that seems to be kind of representing the tribe. You know, and I'm wondering on one hand, okay, did they just choose a few to go do this job that's taking place? Or they just not have as many soldiers now? You know, things not going well with the tribe of Dan. But we're looking at this map, just trying to get a couple things in our mind. We have the tribe of Dan, that's kind of there around the middle part, you see. You know, it's kind of a smaller area. But we're going to be introduced to another section tonight that's way up at the top. And like, where did that come from? Well, it comes out of the storyline that we're following here tonight. You know, so the Danites went up to Laish and they captured it. And they renamed the city there Dan. And so there's a little more to that story. And so that storyline is in Judges chapter 18. So that's where we continue reading. In Judges chapter 18. And like I said, it may very well be just an expanded account or a repeat of the account that was back in Joshua chapter 19. So the Amorites have forced the tribe of Dan into the hill country. You know, so they already have a smaller tribe area. And they're not even able to really get into all of it because the Amorites are there and have taken the plains, have taken the best part, and have forced them into the hill country. And so they're not really in all of what was their inheritance. And so the idea then of going up to Laish and capturing that area up there would kind of alleviate some of the crowding circumstances, and would just get them away from their enemy, the Ammonites. So in chapter 18, let's look at a few verses here. Judges chapter 18. Let's pick up on the storyline. Verse 1. In those days, Israel had no king. You know, that's just kind of a repeated point. Have you noticed that? And that's almost like it sets up what's going to happen in the story coming up. In those days, Israel had no king, so you will not be surprised at what's going to happen now. Okay? And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. Okay, now, so, well, kind of, yes, they had, all right, but they've been kind of pushed out of that, all right? They've been crunched in that area. They were given an allotment way on back. You know, we studied and we read that before, verse 2. So the Danites sent 5 warriors from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all their clans. They told them, go and explore the land. And the men entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Micah? We know Micah. He was part of that other story. To the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned in there and they asked him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here? Wow, what a set of circumstances. Can you imagine that they're at Micah's house and they hear the voice of the Levite and someone says, hey, we know him. You know, and I'm not sure, you know, to that young Levite if he's thinking this is a good thing or bad thing. You know, was he trying to get away from someone? Don't you wonder? Anyway, verse 5. He told them what Micah had done for him, and he said, he has hired me, and I am his priest. That makes me laugh to hear. He's hired me. You know, he's hired me. A little soapbox for about 30 seconds. It's a preacher thing. You've heard me preach before. I don't work for you. I don't work for the elders. I'm a minister of the Lord. I serve him. I am so thankful that the elders see fit, still at this point at least, to have me work here with you, and that you support me for this work that I do. But it's like, I know, understanding this vernaculars we use today, you're hired by somebody to do work. Do you see how that plays here? Micah's hired me. He wants me to be a priest, even though I'm not one, but I will be because he hired me to do that. You see the problem here? I think I have known some preachers that were, I shouldn't even go here. A minister of the Lord. And the priests, the true priests, were the ones God put in place and position to bid his calling, to do his work. You know what? Micah represents that in no way at all. And he's proud of it. So he's met up with these other folks that have come to him from the tribe of Dan. He says, Micah has hired me to be his priest. It seems even with some pride even, okay? This is the storyline. Okay. Then they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. And the priest answered them, go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval. I question that just a little bit, okay? But he's the hired gun. All right, verse 7. So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, the Sidonians unsuspecting and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. And they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. When they returned to Zoa and Eshtaol, their brothers asked, how did you find things? And they said, come on, let's attack them. We have seen that the land is good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands. a land that lacks nothing whatever. Then 600 men from the clan of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. And on their way, they set up a camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called, I'm reading too much here. Get this picture. 600 soldiers. They're marching north. The plan is they're going to go take this land over because they will, because it's easy. It's an easy mark. It's an easy mark for them, what they're going to do. Laish was a peaceful area. There were no neighbors close by. They were an unsuspecting people in a land that lacked nothing. This is an easy touch. And here's what they're going to do. And so, they are marching north. They leave for Laish. They camp near Kiriath Jearim, and from there they're going to go north. Now, imagine this. Let's go back to Micah. Seeing 600 warriors at his gate. You know, even if he knows some of them and they know him, 600 warriors at his gate. He might already be kind of wondering about, is this going to go well? And so, one of the men in verse 14, it says, as they were at Micah's place, one of them said, do you know that one of these houses has an ephod and household gods and carved image and cast idol? Now you know what to do. What do you suppose they're going to do? Yeah, they're going to take them. They're going to get all that silver. They're going to take all of that stuff there. And they turned and the young Levite at Micah's place, and they greeted him. But those Danites there, they're armed for battle. What's Micah going to say? No, you can't have that. Well, he does try to say that. But that's not going to go well. And so they took all of those things, and when he said, what are you doing? Verse 19 says, they said, be quiet. Don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and our priest. Micah can get a promotion. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as a priest rather than just one man's household? Then the priest was glad. He took the ephod and the other household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned and they left and they went away. Wow. Interesting story as this unfolds. When they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites, and they shouted after them. And the Danites turned and said to them, what's the matter with you that you called out your men to fight? And he replied, you took the gods I made and my priest and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask what's the matter? Micah says, I want my priest back. I paid for him. And I want my idols back. I want that silver. I want that back. And the soldiers are saying, almost like, are you for real? Are you serious? You should just go back home, which in essence is what he is going to do. So, all right, let's start thinking here about applications that may come from this. And we haven't got to Laish yet. We're almost there. We'll be there in just a moment. But what are you thinking? Just about this situation as the soldiers come, they take Micah's priest, they take his gods, and the neighbors rally together and say, hey, don't do that, but there's no power there to stop this. I'm just curious, your thoughts about this. Yeah, Jeff?
It's everybody making up what they want us to go. And I think we have mentioned it, but I think it's just worth noting that Michael was extremely rich.
Must have been.
His mother had 1,100 shekels
Yeah.
of silver to make these idols out of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? 10 shekels will buy you a priest for you.
Yeah.
So, huge.
Mm-hmm.
Enormously rich. And at that 1,100, probably had a lot more. So you're dealing with some
Yeah.
rich people.
Yeah, there's There's money involved.
Even with these rogue warriors.
I like the way
doing what they want.
the way you said this. It's like they're kind of making this up as they go, and I think very much that's the way it is. What do we want religion to be today? How should this go for us? You know, that's kind of how I'm seeing that. No thoughts?
I just think it's funny. They steal in the name of religion. They steal the guy's stuff in order to go have a bigger church. So
Yeah. So yeah, that's right. Yeah, as long as we're going to use this for church, it'll be okay. And we're going to hire the priest. You know, this is just so bizarre. You know, it's like I said at the beginning. It's like sometimes I'm not exactly sure why some of these things are in the text, but there is no word in the text that God has just thrown in for no purpose. There's a reason here. There's something for us to take away from this. And I think we've already pulled out some applications as we've walked through this here tonight. Jake, and then Tim.
Just a simple point. I mean, Micah's gods are being exchanged between one party and the next. But they're toys. They're nothing. It's no surprise to us. They have no power. And I think of the story when the ark was taken by the
Philistines, yes.
Anyways, it's taken by them and it's placed in front of their God, and their God continues to follow
Right.
around.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar. These gods have no power. It's nothing. It's meaningless. Right? And it's
Okay, that's a good point too. I wasn't even thinking about that. It's like, what say do these gods have in any of this? Or what say do these gods have in the direction of the religion, you know, that they're supposed to be about? There's nothing there. They're treated like pawns, you know. Tim.
Jeremiah tells us that it's not within man to direct his own steps. And chapter 17, verse 6 says that every man did what was right in his own eyes. There is no limit. Once we leave God, we don't listen to God, there's no limit to how bizarre our actions can be. And our current modern culture is a perfect example of that. How bizarre. I mean, if anybody in the future, if the Lord doesn't come back in the next 100 years and looks back at what we're doing right now, what we're advocating right now as a culture, and said, well, these people are absolutely nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, how can you advocate the things we advocate
Mm-hmm.
today? So this stuff somewhat seems tame compared to some of the things that are going on today.
So the point of not being able to go away from what God says, once you leave God's plan, His authority, His pattern, you can go anywhere you want. And now we've come to a point where there is no king, but there's also no recognition of God is the bigger thing. Jehovah God means nothing to them at all. And so in that regard, they can do whatever they want in the realm of religion, and it seems good to them. And but God's feelings about that are going to be different. Brad, real quick, we got a minute or so.
You nailed it because earlier when you talked about 1 Samuel 8, he told Samuel they rejected me as king. They had a king. God was their king. They just rejected him. And so you see the shenanigans they can get into when they leave God.
And we see where it can go. So now we're at this point in the history of the children of Israel, wherever this falls in the timeline, where there is like absolutely no consideration being given to what Jehovah God has to say. And yet, in the world's vernacular, would we say, are these religious people? Well, yeah, in that they have a religion or a God that they follow. In that vernacular, we would use that same kind of term today. Something to think about with that. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm so glad you're here.